On today's show, a special night for Alex Ovechkin as he and the defense provided the offensive punch to down the Jets.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan HOLMI. I've covered the Capitals for the past 4 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minute Cast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, the Caps keep winning as they down the Jets by a score of 4-3. This was a game that the defense, played a huge role in the Capitals' offense. And a special night for Alex Ovechkin with a ceremony before the game. How did they get it done? I'll talk about that a bit later. I'll talk about how the depth on this team steps up. And a recent call-up here, as it is a good opportunity for Bogdan Trineyev. Will he actually get any playing time? And then in the final segment, we'll talk about Ivan Miroshnichenko's new deal. But just going here, the vibes surrounding this team are really good right now. As you thought, and you looked at the defense in the last game, I'm talking Carlson and Chychrun in particular, and you think to yourself, well, can they keep this going? I mean, what a great story. They were able to do it, but who puts up goals in this game again? John Carlson gets the goal scoring going, and Chychrun, this guy is on a heater right now. He finds the back of the net. Quite an evening for the Caps defense, Alex Ovechkin and Connor McMichael, and things are starting to come together, I do believe, for this team. And not a perfect game, and rarely are there perfect games, but I think it was encouraging because the Jets showed a tremendous amount of pushback, that it came down to the wire, like 1, 2, and it's over, and a big mix-up behind the net. Even Charlie Lindgren looked like he wanted to throw down in this game. So a fun game to watch, all things considered. And, it's kind of, keeping track of where the Capitals are at, that they had a stumble, a bit ago here, but picked up big wins over Columbus, and then the game tonight over the Jets, that there's a feeling that finally, things are starting to gel. But let's just dive into segment 1 here and talk about that special night for Alex Ovechkin, the ceremony before the game, and just everything that went along with it. The statistics that pointed to how many kids picked up hockey because of Alex Ovechkin. And it's not a little bit. There were a lot of young kids. There were a lot of women that picked up hockey in the DC area that had never done it before. And Alex Ovechkin is the guy. You see the kids try to emulate him by putting the gold laces in there. And you take a look at the young players on this team that really looked up to Ovi, and Justin Sordiff comes to mind there, that he's getting to that point of his career where the younger guys on the team were like, yeah, I looked up to you when I was a kid. Had to be a bit surreal for Alex Ovechkin, but Ovi's performance wasn't just impressive. It was stabilizing. It was energizing, as I've always said. As Alex Ovechkin goes, so go the Capitals. And, when he plays better, I think that, it was a good primer for the game, having that ceremony before the game. But for him to actually score a goal in this game definitely had those vibes that, yes, we're in a good spot here. And honestly, it was a difference between another what went wrong and, yeah, they actually got it done tonight episode that I was going to talk to you guys about. But, and it's all about, things could have gone one way or the other. Like I said, it went right down to the wire. There were points in this game that I thought the Capitals were coasting along. Like, yep, this is an easy one. I can start writing my show up before the show even concludes. But they made it very interesting that Winnipeg nearly tied this thing right at the end of the game. But as it turns out, it doesn't matter. There's no close in the box score. It's WL or overtime, I guess. But so here's why that's true. The Caps went out with a purpose early in the game. And, Carlson scoring, getting on the board first, like I've talked about on the show. If you are an everydayer, set the positive wheels in motion as he scores a slap shot, good for his 6th goal of the season. And, like I say, a lot of positivity is coming from that defense. And like I said, Chychrun and Carlson are lightning in a bottle, but it's all about, Alex Ovechkin and what he has done in this game as well. But you can see it, like I said, on the blue line, you could see with Carlson trying to push the pace up the middle. The puck movement looked clean. The defense gaps were tight. And, it felt like a team that wanted to respond after some recent inconsistencies because, you take a look at the Capitals picking up some big wins, 3 wins in a row. And then, we stumbled and fell down the stairs here again. So to be able to put together 2 wins in a row, I'm going to take it for what it is. It's a good feeling that, yes, we can do this. It's not win 1 and lose a bunch. But to be clear here, Winnipeg is a heavy skilled team. And, they know that there was going to be some pushback, and there was. And that's when the Capitals needed to do something from a guy who has been delivering for nearly 2 decades. And Ovechkin gets the puck. He works into that left side space, and he gets that little spin. He fires the wrister that only he can make routine. And, the thing of it is, and people talk about it all the time, that it's coming, right? But you don't know if you can stop it. And it hasn't been, I guess I would say, as lethal as it has been in years before. But Alex Ovechkin, talking about a guy that got off to a slow start, now has 11 goals on the season with that snapshot. So, things are coming together, slowly but surely. And this is, Thanksgiving break here, and happy Thanksgiving to everyone that's listening to this show on Thursday. A good measuring stick that, it was a week or so ago that things weren't looking so well. But, Ovechkin, it's not just the goal scored, it's the confidence returning to this team. All of a sudden things seem possible that, it doesn't necessarily have to be, push the panic button. And it's easy because, like I say, and it's follow the bouncing ball with the Capitals. We're good. We're not so good. We're good. We're not so good. That if that could level out, right, and they could, string together even more wins, I think that would restore stability to the organization, the fan base, that we don't know, or we don't necessarily need to go and blow this thing up. I mean, I still think that they do, and I don't want to get too caught up in 2 wins here. But, maybe it's not as bleak as it was a week or so ago. Now, there were issues. Carlson had an issue in this game that could have easily ended up in the back of the net. There was that roughing penalty, a couple of sloppy exits that led to the Jets grabbing momentum. And the Jets are the type of team that does not need many chances to punish you. But here's the important part, and it's resiliency. It's being resilient in a situation like this, and that's not something that's easily quantifiable. Resilient. What does that mean? That, when the Jets were pouring that on, they didn't fold. Like I said, it came right down to the wire, and I very well could be coming to you guys right now talking about, it going to overtime, which I guess could have led to a Capitals win or a Jets win, or could have gone to the shootout. But I don't need to talk about that because the team didn't panic. They stayed in the game. They weathered the shifts where Winnipeg controlled the puck. And that's the big thing. That is a change from what we have seen earlier in the season. And they kept finishing their plays when they had to. And Connor McMichael's goal, I mean, that was one that really had the fist pumping in my house when I was watching the game, actually watching it on my phone after I put my daughter to bed. I mean, if you're a parent out there, you got to kind of piece these games together. I put her down to bed and opened up my phone there, and I see the goal scored there, and you're like, yes. And he was so excited that Chychrun, it was all he could do to kind of slow him down, to bring him in for that kind of group hug after a goal. But a feel-good goal, that was another one of the goals in the game that really had you like, there's some of those where you almost feel like standing out of your chair and pumping your fist. But, the guy's got wheels. And sometimes I think that, we forget that, how fast Connor McMichael really is. And I think that, to a certain extent, it feels especially good for him is because he's not on pace to do what he did the season before. So it was a good feeling for them and for him there. But that's the big thing there, is this team working together, and Charlie Lindgren being huge when he had to be, not a perfect game, but I mean, you're not going to have a shutout every game, right? That I think that Chucky, put together a pretty nice game. He wasn't flashy, but he was composed. It looked like he tracked the pucks well. He cut down the angles. His glove hand looked sharp, and he didn't overplay the rebounds. And the big thing is he didn't give Winnipeg momentum through some of the slop that was out there. He just quietly went about his business. And those are the nights that help you, reset your identity and to just say, hey, we're in a good spot right now. So the way I look at this was a nice team victory by the Capitals. They outshot them 34-21. The power play, 0 for 2. And, talking about the PK there as well, is that Winnipeg did make good on one of their power play opportunities, but taking it for what it is, it was a nice evening for the Capitals, and a nice cherry on top for Alex Ovechkin, scored his 908th NHL goal. So quite an evening for the Capitals, and a lot to feel happy about as we head into this Thanksgiving break. All right, so coming up here after the break, we talk about the next man up mentality. As we know, Nick Dowd is out, and a call up for a young Capital that I'm sure's name is quite familiar to you if you follow this team, Bogdan Trineyev. Depth steps up to this team. What does that mean? I'll discuss next. The NBA is back, and there is no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game more exciting, especially when your team is making a push. So whether you're a fan of the Wizards or whatever other NBA team, open up the FanDuel app, put a little bit of money on the game. All of a sudden, they got that much more exciting. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com and sign up to play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank all of you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in the second segment here, we're talking about depth steps up and the possibility of what could be. You see oftentimes players get called up for sheets just kind of as fluff or filler, and sometimes they don't get an opportunity. And you saw that with Ethan Frank. You've seen that with different AHL call-ups, that they're kind of just up for insurance. But most recently here, Bogdan Trineyev getting called up for his first NHL shot. Well, that says a ton about where the Caps are headed with their depth and development, and a good opportunity for him, as he is a guy that has shown up big and a name that I've kind of circled in my mind. Like, I would like to see him on the NHL, playing on the Capitals during a regular season game. But the thing of it is when you take a look at his body of work, this wasn't a charity call-up. This wasn't, let's give him a taste. This was a reward for steady progress and trust that he can handle real NHL minutes in a bottom six role. So here's why this matters. To drill down on it a little bit more, is Nick Dowd going on the IR really could have messed things up, right? That, things have gone well, sort of, at the second line center looks well. McMichael, third line center, that things have gone much better, I guess, than they could have. But, there was a feeling that PLD going out, ooh, this is rough. But Nick Dowd, oh my God, the season, can we even survive this? That they have a good option because, Dowd is super important. And what does he bring? Face-offs, defensive structure, penalty kill IQ, and, those subtle plays that never make highlight reels, but absolutely win games. And you talk to anybody, it was a couple seasons ago that Saravalli and Friedman were talking about that, expect Dowd to be on the move. Just because there was a lot of buzz because what he does, and oftentimes it's not in the spotlight. It's not an Alex Ovechkin shot from his office, but losing him even short-term puts pressure on your center depth, a position and a roster that doesn't have a lot of depth on the big team. So that's why they have to go down to the farm, if you will, in Hershey. And in the past season, you could feel the organization scrambling when things like this happened, but it's not really the case this season. This time they looked at Hershey and said, all right, who's the next guy up? Who's going to get the taste? Who is deserving of this? And who's earned it? And that's what I don't want lost on any of this is it's not like, well, this guy, put his time in. This is some sort of, I hate to say it, like union job, right? That, he's the guy right there. And that's the thing that we noticed there. Who comes in and not sink the line? And the answer is Bogdan Trineyev. And he's been building his game slowly and steadily. Again, if you watch any of the games or pay attention to the different publications, I talk about the Bears from time to time on here, that he is a key contributor. More pace, what we've seen from him, better board play and smarter puck decisions, which is what put him here. And, it's the other things. He's got size, which helps. He's got a good compete level, and he plays a style that fits exactly what you want from, let's say, a fourth liner in the modern NHL. He forechecks with purpose. He finishes his checks, but stays inside structure. And, he doesn't try to do too much with the puck. He doesn't try to be too cutesy, if you will. What he does do is he protects the middle of the ice defensively. And he supports wingers well as well. And these are the things that might sound kind of boring when you talk about them, but they're the difference between, a stable bottom six and one that gives momentum every time it touches the ice. And when you call a guy like that up, it sends a message. It says the development system, within the organization is not only producing talent, but producing NHL caliber talent. That often these guys will toil in the ECHL, the AHL, and sometimes they don't get their opportunity, but he has a different skill set that has kind of maybe, fast-tracked him more than other players. And what it shows is that the staff trusts him, and it reinforces to other prospects that if I put my work in, that I very well could get rewarded. And, when he gets into the lineup, the key things to watch are simple. Does he read plays quickly enough? That they tried to run pretty much the same systems that they have in Hershey that they do with the Capitals. But, how is that working? Does he support the puck below the dots? Does he win board battles? Does he skate at the NHL pace? Because, you don't want a liability out on the ice at the end of the day. The Capitals are doing well, and that this is his opportunity, but there's not a give me. Does he get caught watching the puck? That's sometimes looking like you fit. Or does he stay connected to coverage? If he does those things well, I think that he's going to do more than people realize. And I think that the veterans will help him too. And guys on the team that are rooting for him at the end of the day, even Protas, who's still young, but already understands how to calm down a line. they'll make sure he's ready. And there's the leaders on the team. There's Ovechkin, there's Wilson. I noticed that Wilson is kind of the go-to guy for some of the younger players because I think he's still young enough that he's relatable and doesn't have quite like that, godlike aura that Ovechkin has, even though I think that Ovechkin is primarily pretty approachable. And but that's how good teams survive injury. It's not reaching out to the waiver wire or getting on the phone and trading a bunch of players just because a guy goes down. When you have an organization that develops players as well as Hershey does, as the Capitals do, then there's not the real need to push the panic button. So it'll remain to be seen if he gets any playing time. But at the end of the day, a good insurance and the potential, the possibility, shall we say, of what can be. All right, so coming up here after the break, another Capitals player gets rewarded. Ivan Miroshnichenko. We'll talk about his new deal and where does he fit in with the Capitals long term. Straight ahead. Let's be honest, most of us can't name all our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth between 401ks, savings, and investments. It's easy to lose track, and that can mean leaving money on the table. That's why I started using Monarch, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. And the thing that I absolutely love about Monarch, and I know that you will too, is you can see where you're spending your money wisely and where you could use some work. Like I see that I'm doing well saving for retirement, but I spend too much on going out to eat and sports memorabilia. And if you have a significant other in your life, well, you can help plan your financial future together. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarch.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarch.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube, like the videos, and comment anything down below. In the final segment of today's show, we're talking about another young, promising player in Ivan Miroshnichenko and, him signing a new deal. And I think that there is a lot to look into that because we know that this team is a team in transition. We know that Ovi is playing in his final year under contract. And who knows after that? Does he play a year or two? I still kind of hold to the belief that it is his final year. So you need building blocks like Ivan Miroshnichenko for the future. And they have those in Leonard. And you see the other young players, Protas and Little Protas and, these kind of players that are going to be the future faces of this team. So I think a good sign for the Capitals, the Hershey Bears as well, that they were able to get this done, because there was the feeling for me that if they didn't get this done, that, and you see this quite often with players that they say, they don't want me here? Maybe I'll try out my luck overseas. Maybe I'll go to Russia. Maybe I'll go somewhere, else in Europe and see if I can catch on there. So I think that it's good, that they took care of this, what I'm going to say, quote unquote, situation. So let's talk about that in the final segment of today's show. Talking about Miroshnichenko signing a 2-year extension is, I think, a huge indicator where they see him in the future. And I've dubbed him before as Alex Ovechkin 2.0, sprinkled with a little bit of hyperbole there, but still, I think has the makings of that kind of player. And they want to lock in his growth path. So ultimately, there's no temptation to either A, go to another NHL team, or try to B, go overseas for the perceived greener pastures. And the team didn't gamble on a 1-year look. They gave him a runway. They gave him trust that, hey, we believe in you for the long term. And they gave themselves cost, certainly during a part of this reset and where young goal scorers are gold. That there is the real feeling like he could be, or he could have been, the one that got away. And I don't want that to be the case. I still have very high hopes for Miroshnichenko. And here's why this matters. Miro has something that the Capitals need: instinct around the net, a finishing touch, and a good off-puck timing, and a willingness to go inside. That's the big thing as well. And those are not, common traits in young forwards, and he possesses those. And, the Capitals have been in on him for years, all the way back to the draft, that he would have gone much higher in the draft if it wasn't for the Hodgkin's lymphoma. Ross Mahoney and his crew did their due diligence to look at his work, talk to the doctors, said it's in remission. They visit him over in Russia. He was so skinny that the jeans were falling off of him. But what did he do? Terminated his KHL contract, put the work in the gym. And this is a guy that is a story of being resilient, that I don't ever want to hear anyone talk about that they got problems in their life that are too hard to get over. Because you got a guy like Ivan Miroshnichenko who had a serious illness, that could have been, I hate to say it could have been very serious. I'll leave it at that. And, he was playing overseas, and there was a chance that it could have gone poorly. But the Capitals were able to look into him. And that's one of the things the Capitals do well, is drafting great players. And this kind of exemplifies what I'm talking about with Mahoney and his crew, is being able to see a true diamond. I don't want to say in the rough, but, a diamond that stood above the others. And I think that, locking him in here is going to set his mind at ease a little bit, that, the Capitals want me in this organization, and we know that there's going to be changes at some point. And, the front office, they clearly see what he brings, and they want him time to turn, what he has into more a well-rounded NHL game. And the contract gives him time to grow, and he has had sips of coffee on the big team. I just think that he is maybe more of a slow build than others. And some could argue, at the end of the day, some players on the current roster, should they be there? Should it be Miro over some of the other players that are on this team? And that's all things to consider, and things that could very well change throughout the season, based on inconsistent play or injury, those kind of things. And like I said, the big thing is it gives the Caps control as they build the next wave in the post-Ovechkin era. He's shown AHL level that he can finish plays, that he can score on the rush, and he can score on the cycle, and he isn't afraid to go to the physical areas. And now you want to see how that translates to the NHL, big picture, not, a sample here, a sample there, where he played really good in 3 games and then not so much and was a healthy scratch. When is Miro going to arrive? When will he be NHL ready? Because I'm going to just point at you, Hendrik Slop, here, that, you had a great camp, and, I'm still not fully convinced that Hendrik Slop here has arrived. So it's easy to get kind of caught up in the hype train sometime, that I want Miro as darn near fully cooked as possible. So when he is, quote unquote, ready, in my estimation, that there's not going to be any was that the right move? But usage will be key. Does he get scored? Does he get any time on the power play? Does he get minutes with skilled players? Does the coaching staff shelter him in his matchups, to not put too much pressure on him? And I think the upside is there, and the path for him to the NHL is realistic, just based on the lay of the land with where the Capitals are at. And the commitment to both sides, Miro and his representation and the Capitals and their representation, is encouraging. And it's kind of a statement, I think, to the NHL at large, to lock in your young scorers, give them structure and give them time. And what better place for him to work on his game than in Hershey, a team that knows how to develop players and a team that knows how to win hockey games. And that's a big thing. Let the core of the Capitals mentor him a little bit. And, there's players on this team that he looks up to, countrymen that have played here either now or in the past, that I'm feeling really good about that. That was one of the stories coming out of the Capitals, the Bears, that had me feeling really good that they're, and I talked about this on another podcast, that there was a feeling like he changed representation. And I talked about on the show that, watch, the next thing we're going to hear is that he wants to try out overseas, right? That he wants to go to Russia or somewhere in Europe to try to get a jump start on his career. You've seen various Capitals players do that. And a lot of players from Hershey last year did that, went on to Europe and that kind of thing. So I'm glad that they got it taken care of. And it's one of the things that I can cross off in my mind that I don't need to worry about, that Miro's here. And if you're asking me, I think that he is going to have a role if I was going to pencil him in next season. So it's health. He has dealt with some injuries and those kind of things as well, but I think his trajectory is on the right path. But there's going to be a lot of competition in there. As Ilya Protas, if you don't know, is absolutely torching it for Hershey right now. So a lot of young players. And I think that, like I talked about, this past season, that there's going to be a battle in camp. Expect that next season in camp as well. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. And now for your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night, until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan HOLMI, and I'll talk to you again next time.